Hello, I want to show you my little badge. There you go. And what I'll try to do is God, my nose is huge. I'll try to put a better picture of it up, sort of in that corner or something like that, so you can see it. But what is that? Well, you'll probably see it says "All Rise." It's a very nice badge. It's all like sort of eco-friendly wood and everything. But that's a badge that you can wear at court, and that announces to any other barrister that if they are experiencing bullying or harassment, either from other barristers or indeed from the judiciary, that I can be approached, and then I can sort of see what I can do, if anything, to help people. And that could be just offering a sympathetic ear, or it could be having a quiet word with somebody, or it could be taking things forward, and actually involving the sort of various regulators, whether that's the Bar Standards Board for Barristers or the Judicial Conduct Office, if it's a judge. But is this a problem at the bar, bullying and harassment? Well, yes, it is. And what I want to talk about today is a report. Baroness Harriet Harman, KC, you may remember, she was commissioned to do an independent review of bullying, harassment and SUL harassment at the bar. And we now have the full report. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to link to it in the description, because it's a very lengthy report. But it's got some very interesting aspects in it. I mean, first of all, it gives just examples, that people have sort of put up with. And you can sort of see some of both in court, out of court, but also on social media, and just generally sort of, in the legal profession generally, things that happen at sort of chambers or chambers parties or do's on things like that. And it makes a series of recommendations. And those recommendations are to be adopted. Primarily, they're putting all the emphasis on the Bar Standards Board as our regulator and saying, right, you need to change. We don't actually have a code of conduct anymore. They call it the handbook, but it is essentially the code of conduct. And as I always say to people, there are very few ethical problems at the bar. They're usually just, I'm going to have an awkward conversation with somebody problems. And I always say all the answers are in there. They can just be a nightmare to find because it's not particularly well formatted. There is actually an alternative that a friend of mine did, where he made a sort of searchable PDF version, and I actually know that there are certain people at the BSB use that version rather than their own. But I'd like to say, I think you should form your own views on this, because most of it seems fairly straightforward. Because people just shouldn't bully. People shouldn't use their experience and sort of their status either to harass people or to get them to do things they might otherwise not wish to do. So there's, the whole gamut there. I mean, it all starts with, the fact of how the bar works. We're all sort of independent, self-employed practitioners. So when you get your feet in chambers, how's the work distributed? Well, it's distributed through the clerks. But how do you sort of build your career? Well, in the early stage, you do a lot by sort of offering to assist more senior counsel, either sort of being their junior on big cases or being willing to assist, on sort of interlocutory hearings. Well, actually, we're not supposed to say interlocutory anymore, are we? Interim hearings. But how do you get that work? I mean, in fairness, most people are just really cool and will sort of say, do you want to have a go at this? Get some experience. But there is this idea that sometimes people will put pressure on people. It's like, hey, let's just pop to the pub afterwards and have a little chat about how your career can development and make sure you wear something skimpy. Unfortunately, that is happening. But there's also, like I say, there's all the social media stuff. And this is where it's going to get interesting, because there's all the clashes about Article 10. But they do raise some very good points in there that people have been disciplined for what might seem relatively minor things, but then calling certain people, including my friend Charlotte, the C word was considered to be, just an exercise of free speech. And, there is that clash there. And the idea is, you get this a lot at the bar, where it's like, you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen, and you've got to be robust in this job. And you do have to be robust in this job. And there is obviously a difference between a judge being sort of quite, engaging in sort of strong case management and making their views felt, but then just bullying people. I mean, there was one example where it was a judge who was notorious for effectively being a bully and picking up on everything that anybody, even the most minor thing. And the problem is people were prioritising his cases. And so, make sure I've ticked every box. at the expense of others. Now, you might say, and it's a very reasonable thing to say, well, surely you should put the same effort into every case. And in fairness, people will try to do that. But obviously, in the real world, there are pressures. And it may well be that, the fear of being in front of a particular judge means that other cases do suffer as a consequence. So, I mean, I'm more interested in actually all your comments on this. Like I say, it's a very, very lengthy report. But I would be very interested in what you say. So I advise you to read through it. Like I say, have a look at the examples of what's actually happened. And also then have a look at the recommendations. I mean, one that people have already been commenting on, and it's a difficult one to defend, where they're saying that there should be no esual relations between barristers and pupils, or indeed barristers and employees in chambers. And I can see that because it's a bit like the school teacher thing. You are in a position of power over somebody. And more importantly, you see, with things like pupils, they're all like keen to get tenancy. And they don't want to be seen to rock the boat. So, they don't want to be seen to be a troublemaker. And that's a big problem. They've identified that it might be more of a problem out on what we call circuit. Because, like I say, the country is divided into various circuits from the days of the older sizes. And some of the sort of circuits are relatively small. So everybody knows everybody, and there is that idea that it's even worse on circuit, because if you get a reputation as just a troublemaker or a trouble causer, then it's going to have a more detrimental effect than if you're just practicing in London where there's loads of solicitors and loads of potential work. So it's very interesting to see. But yeah, in a practical sense, like I say, my little badge, which is on the wrong side, what does that actually mean? I mean, I do get, because I do a lot of the advocacy training. And I have to say, in all fairness, a lot of the stuff I get isn't so much about the harassment things and stuff. It's just more about sort of just generally finding their feet at the bar generally. But, it is a little strange. I get approached by, I've had like black girls approach me and ask about what should their hair, should I straighten it? Should I look? And it's like, well, I think I'm probably the wrong guy to ask for lots and lots of reasons and stuff. But that is the problem, that who do people approach? And the idea with this is we can sort of say, well, look, at least you can approach us. And they have changed the rules slightly because there is a duty on us. It's professional misconduct if we do not report other misconduct. So if we see something going wrong, we are technically under a duty to report it. We're meant to be a self-regulating profession. Normally that's not a problem, but what if it is something like esual harassment? Well, under the old rules, we were obliged to say, we have seen this and we've seen this going on. And we report it. But what if the victim doesn't want reporting for all the reasons, like I said, it would be nice if we had a system where victims felt that their complaints would be taken seriously and they would get a fair hearing and it wouldn't have any detriment on their careers. But obviously they do worry about that. So there was always this thing, well, hang on, shouldn't it be up to the victim what actually happens here rather than just some observer? I see something going on, so I report it to the BSB and then they say to the person, you've had a complaint against you by Mr. R, where you allegedly did this to Miss X. And it's all out in the open then. So now the rules have changed actually, and you can sort of say, right, I saw this. I'm happy to assist if you want, even if it's just making a note of what actually happened for future reference. Or do you want me to have a quiet word with somebody? Or do you want to make this official? But the whole point is it should be up to the victim. And like I say, it's the same with judicial conduct. Do you report it to the Judicial Conduct Office and things like that? I mean, I'm from the era where, yeah, we did have sort of scary judges. I have to say now, most judges are fairly chilled and laid back, but it clearly is an issue. I mean, you see these things, and obviously it's very difficult for me because of, I've been a bit long in the tooth doing this, and also just because of who I am and how I react and stuff. Obviously, it's not necessarily a problem for me, so you have to be very careful that you don't say, well, everybody's fine with me. So what are you complaining about? I can't see anything, because a lot of this is invisible. I mean, people are clever, people are subtle. I mean, it's always interesting when people say, oh, it wasn't my fault, it was a momentary lapse of reason, I just lost control. And it's like, well, no, because if you lost control, you'd have done this in front of everybody. The fact that you took somebody somewhere quiet and discreet seems to imply that you are very in control about all this sort of thing. But like I say, I'd just be very, very interested in your thoughts. So I'll link in the description to the full report, and also a little bit more about the All Rise campaign so that you can see what that's about. And like I said, this is one where I actually just want to hear your thoughts on this. So there you go. As always, hope you found that vaguely interesting, vaguely useful. I would say vaguely accurate, but I basically just said there's a report out and I think you should read it. So I think that's fairly accurate.